We now begin to explore the next session of Module 1. In this session, what we will be looking at is the application really of the ICTs in development sectors addressing these specific Millennium Development Goals. While we can broadly make the linkage between ICTs and the development goals and development for that purpose, it is necessary for us to understand how in a given sector, whether it is health, disaster management or education, there has been an application of technology which has made the difference between success and failure. So here in this session, we are going to link the actual application of an ICT to a specific sector. And we begin by doing this by structuring the session in terms of the different Millennium Development Goals. There are examples that are given in this section of the module, and I would strongly recommend that you go to the text and you also go to the websites of these case studies so that you can experience and feel for yourself what they have been able to achieve. This will go a long way in helping you to understand what this part of the module is about. Essentially, when we look at the use of ICTs, sometimes people think it is merely the deployment of computers or it's merely making available the internet at a particular place. This is not so. There is a purpose to a use of technology, and it is the purpose that defines whether an intervention is direct or indirect. And indirect, so we look at the two kinds of interventions, direct and indirect. And it is important we understand the difference. The direct intervention is when there is a direct interface between the services of that are provided by the ICT and the poor who are accessing the ICTs. Indirect experiences are when ICTs are used in order to support an existing project or program or a goal. And indirect ICTs may be in terms of a specific program or goal, or in terms of building information and decision support systems. And so we will be looking at both direct interventions and at indirect interventions, and we will be linking these to each of the Millennium Development Goals. Once again, I repeat that while we're looking at sectors, we must understand that there are interconnecting factors and that no one sector is mutually exclusive. And this is an important distinction that has to be made between direct and indirect, and by the fact that while we're studying a particular case, that particular case may have linkage with more than one Millennium Development Goal. Keeping that in mind, let us proceed to understanding how ICTs have been used in different countries of the Asia-Pacific region with specific examples. The first Millennium Development Goals, which talks about eradicating extreme poverty and hunger, essentially says that we must halve between the year 1990 and 2005 the proportion of people whose income is less than $1 a day. A second target says that we must halve between 1990 and 2015 the proportion of people who suffer from hunger. There are various signals that tell us whether this has been achieved in different parts of the world. I am not going to get into the debates on whether we are achieving the targets or not. What I will tell you is to show you examples of where efforts have been made and efforts have yielded success in moving toward these targets. We know, for instance, and I must reiterate this at the beginning, that the impact of the ICTs on the economy has been tremendous. The ICTs, as global evidence shows us, spur economic growth. particularly those of the small and medium enterprises. To give you an example, the powerhouses that are India and China in the global information and knowledge economy is partly because of the strength not of their huge giant industrial bases, but of the small and medium enterprises which are now providing value-added services through the use of ICTs. And how have small and medium enterprises used these ICTs? Essentially using computer software or using the applications or using internet has helped companies to improve the efficiency of internal and external business operations. For instance, the process of bill payment, the process of billing, for instance, and of invoicing, the process of couriering transactions has all come down as communication costs and have come down as internal efficiencies have gone up. You yourself must have experienced the difference between the price of sending a letter by courier compared to the price of an email with an attachment, and how it has improved costing. So one of the simplest ways is improving internal processes and external business operations through the use of ICTs. Many a small and medium company have found access to new and global markets by using the internet and websites. This way, they have been able to expand their business and increase the volumes of demand for their products. They have also improved inventory management, so you no longer have huge storehouses of drugs or essential commodities lying waiting to be sold. The internal processes now and supply chain management enable them to produce just what is required at a particular time when it has to hit the market. So this improves inventory control. Small and medium enterprises have also reduced wastage and consequently increased profits. Through effective business practices using technologies, these have enabled small and medium enterprises in many of the larger IT countries to dramatically transform their own operations and to transform consequently the economies of their countries. Having said that, it is important to recognize that in some cases, industry and private sector-led growth supported by ICTs has contributed to poverty reduction. But the fact is that the government remains a major stakeholder in poverty reduction strategies, and the poor have benefited less from the type of development that ICTs have had upon the economy. In other words, improving small and medium enterprises may, but it may also not have a direct impact upon poverty reduction, which is why governments have to use ICTs to address poverty reduction directly. And this is an important thing. This is why governments remain and will continue to remain in poorer countries major stakeholders in efforts to reduce poverty among their people. What is poverty? Many of us have many definitions of how we understand poverty, and each one of us understands it in a different way. Sometimes we look in terms of economics, sometimes we look in terms of access, sometimes we look in terms of hunger. But essentially, if we were to sum up the commonalities, we'd find lack of income, lack of access to jobs or income-generating activities, lack of access to land, land being a right, land being an asset. So we're talking about asset management. We're talking about lack of access to credit and loans, lack of access to services such as education and healthcare. A regular experience of hunger. The poor are hungry most of the time. Similarly, lack of education to services provided by a government. Low life expectancy, huge infant and maternal mortality rates. These are greater among the poor than they are among the rich, simply because the poor cannot afford access to the kind of services that the rich can. Consequently, when there is a disaster and when there is a conflict, it is the poor that are worst affected. Their increased vulnerability to disasters and conflict, because once a disaster strikes, their ability to recover from the disaster and to rehabilitate themselves is affected by the lack of income and the lack of access to jobs. So understanding poverty and understanding that on the one hand there is no direct link between ICTs and the economy and improving poverty is essential. And therefore, when we begin to look at how countries have used ICTs directly or indirectly to address the poverty issue, one has to look at examples, and that is what we will begin to do. I draw your attention and I invite you to visit the website of ThreadNet Hunza. What is this? Have you ever heard of the place called Hunza? Hunza is a small remote community in the mountains of northern Pakistan. And there basically are communities of weavers. Through an IDRC sponsored initiative and the local community, a website has been created which links the carpet weavers of Hunza directly to markets outside, where they can, through the website, access markets and even effect sales. So therefore, by linking the poor to a market outside, the income generating capacity of the poor has increased. But ThreadNet is one example of how a remote community can access a website and access income generating sources and then consequently improve the life of the people living there. This is an ongoing endeavor, and I invite you to look at this as a direct intervention of linking markets through ICTs to the poor who have then access to them. I also draw your attention to an award-winning example of an indirect intervention where ICTs have formed the backbone of a large program, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. In India, an enabling legislation compelled governments to provide income security and food security to the landless and the poor in villages by guaranteeing an income from about 100 days of work in public works programs in villages. Managing this kind of a program in a huge country like India can be not just uphill but a monumental task. In Andhra Pradesh, a group of senior civil servants with a different way of thinking began exploring the ways in which an ICT backbone could be used to manage the project. I invite you to look at the NREGA website, which is a complete portal which enables both the poor villager to have access to see where the work is available, to get what we might call a job card which entitles the villager to 100 days of work, to seeing whether he's being paid, to seeing what is in his savings account where the money is paid in for his work, to see what works are in his village, what are completed, and also to audit actually whether the work is proceeding well. What NREGA website and the use of this technology has done is to provide not only the villager with the empowerment that he or she needs to access work, particularly in seasons when agriculture is not the mainstay. At the same time, it has enabled the villager to see whether or not he's getting a regular income. Meanwhile, sitting in the secretariat of the government official is able to monitor on a day-to-day process and on a day-to-day basis whether or not the scheme is progressing and whether or not actually the work is being delivered, whether the work is being done, whether the poor are being employed, for how many days they are being employed, and to effectively monitor the program. So NREGA Andhra Pradesh is an example of an indirect intervention where the program is of guaranteeing employment, but the technology has been used to support the implementation of that program. And that is why NREGA has been recognized as a best practice worldwide for the efforts that it has made in trying to reach the poor. I invite you again to visit its website and look not just for what made it its success, but look also for what gaps there would be and what you would do if you had to improve it. On the private sector side, similarly, so while we're talking about government interventions, a private sector has also, in industry, has also enabled farmers to sell their products on a website called eChaupal. eChaupal means e-marketplace. You have a product to sell, you can go to the eChaupal website, advertise it, and sell it without the presence of middlemen. And usually it is the middlemen that take the bulk of the margin between the farmer's price and the market price. So at this point, by reducing those margins, you can improve, through the use of technology, the effect of, you can improve their incomes and you can help them get more money and more value for their work. These are 3 examples of websites. There must be many more, and there must be examples within your own regions. I would invite you to look at them, because time and space inhibits me from putting in all the cases that exist of such activities in poverty reduction in the Asia Pacific. I also talked about not just supporting indirect interventions, but also of supporting researchers and scientists and academics, policymakers and planners in getting information they need in order to develop a program. NRAP is another website portal which helps agricultural scientists get new information about developments in their field, and therefore they can then consequently apply these from lab to land. So NRAP is a support service. It's a support service not to a program, but to the people who are going to deliver a program. So in that sense, we have looked at 3 different kinds of interventions in poverty reduction. The ThreadNet Hunza, which is a direct intervention linking the poor to a market. The NREGA, which is in support of a program objective of providing 100 days of employment to the poor per year. And the NRAP, which is an effort at a much higher level of providing a support service for basically scientists and those working in the field. Having looked at poverty reduction initiatives and inviting you to look at so many more that exist but are little heard of, and if you explore the internet you will find them, let us look at what is happening in terms of primary education. This being a major goal, and it was also a target that by 2015 we should see that children everywhere, boys and girls, go to school. Enrollment being one part of it, what does this mean in terms of increasing access to education? Other than business and small and medium enterprises, education has been the one area in which the application of technologies has been very, very great. In fact, it is often argued that if there is a growth sector, these growth sectors are going to be in terms of social infrastructure and in terms of education. That no longer are we talking about just building roads, we're talking about building healthcare and education facilities or providing access. So while this is a laudable, laudable development goal, it is also an area where there is greatest amount of business activity. But what is it that makes the use of ICTs in education so promising and also so exciting, and an area which has been explored worldwide through almost all regions as a way of increasing access? Among the most important things is that it provides access to high quality materials no matter where you are. In other words, through the internet, I can access the best teachers, and it doesn't matter whether I'm living in Tonga, whether I'm living in Mongolia, or whether I'm living in Afghanistan. The material that can be developed anywhere can also be accessible anywhere through the internet at the same undiminished quality. Therefore, we extend reach. We extend reach to those who do not have access to teachers, to those who do not have access to schools, to laboratories that can be then shown through the internet because they don't have access to schools. One of the things that has been demonstrated through research is that technology and ICTs enable collaborative learning. This means that it is possible to link learners from one school to another through a school net or school network, and it is possible to link learners to teachers and mentors. The AVA, the Virtual Academy, is one example not only of increasing access but also of collaborative learning as we learn through the academy, you and I, and we learn together. Interactivity, a feature that allows interactivity or collaboration between learners, between teachers and trainers. This is another dimension of ICTs which has been proven to work. Distance, isolation are no longer a determinant to the quality or the cost of learning. Among the things that we found, that access to schools, access to colleges was proving to be problematic for the poor in the villages. Now we can actually provide learning right in their homes, in the community telecenter, and wherever they are. So distance, geographic, and cost are no longer determinants of learning. And it makes management of education so much more simpler. In many ways, virtual and e-learning platforms have looked at admissions, assessment, certification done online, removing the necessity of high costs and time of educational management. These are some examples, or these are some ways in which ICTs can be used in education. So let us look at some examples of increasing access. I cite only the National Institute of Open Schooling in India, not because it is the world's largest open school, but because it demonstrates that it is possible to even use technologies for primary and secondary education, places where sometimes we feel that the teacher is most required to be present. So the National Institute of Open Schooling, again, I invite you to visit the website and explore, is one example where access to basic education has been provided for increasing number of people who, for either economic or social reasons, cannot get basic education. Further to the Indian experience, there are experiences in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in many countries of Africa and elsewhere, where open schooling is not only the only available, but also the desired option for learning by young people. It is worth exploring because it makes, it enables a young person to learn in the comfort of their own homes without having the problems that of distance and isolation. Further, open schools can allow bridge courses which enable young people who have dropped out to actually get back into the mainstream of education. So here is an example, the National Institute of Open Schooling. In higher education, one will wonder what is possible for us to do. All of us have heard about e-learning, we've heard about virtual universities. One example of the virtual university for the small states of the Commonwealth is worth looking at, and it's worth looking at because this is not designed by large countries with huge internal markets like China or India. It is designed by, it is created for, and it is developed by the small landlocked countries of the Commonwealth. And here you find that in a collaborative manner, universities in the Indian Ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, the Caribbean area, and in Africa have come together to jointly develop courses and offer higher education. The Virtual University of Small States is still in a development phase, and it remains to be seen as to how it finally works out. But it is a very exciting experience in process of using technologies, and it is worth looking at as a model, particularly in parts of Central Asia where distances and smallness inhibit the establishment of large educational systems at a higher education level. When it comes to non-formal education, there are many instances of using community telecenters. One example is, of course, of the Solomon Islands Pfnet, where there's a distance learning center where adults can come and learn in a learning center in a non-formal. The difference between formal education and non-formal is that in formal we talk about schools, teachers, buildings, curriculum, examinations, and certificates. In non-formal education is the learning at your own pace, learning what you want to know and what you need to know, learning literacy maybe, learning a bridge course which enables you to enrich and improve your life and to cope with the daily rigors of life. And for those who have been left out of the opportunity of education earlier, using ICTs for non-formal education is a boon that many will then turn to because there is no other way in which they could have learned. A recent experience in the Philippines is that of the eSwela. eSwela is an design particularly for out-of-school youth in the Philippines, and there are increasing number of dropouts in many parts of the Asia Pacific, people dropping out of schools, is an ICT-based initiative of setting up centers in different parts of the Philippines where these young people can go and complete their schooling. I invite you to look it up because it's an exciting way in which ICTs can be used to enhance access to education and to bring more of our young people into the mainstream of education. Alongside looking at Millennium Development Goal 2, which had to do with education, one turns around and looks at Millennium Development Goal 3, which again is linked closely. And this Goal 3 specifically talks about promoting gender equality and to empower women. And target of the 4 of the Millennium Development Goal essentially says that we will eliminate gender disparity in primary and secondary education, preferably by 2005, and in all levels by 2015. We have, of course, crossed the 2005 barrier, and we're well into almost 2010. And when we begin to look at eliminating gender inequality, we have then to look at what are the issues that prevent or have inhibited the access to education and to empowerment for women. There are always arguments when we have gender debates on whether it is male versus female, men versus women. While there are parts of the world where male underachievement is a major issue and women have forged ahead, there are far larger parts of the world and larger population where for one reason or another, women and girls have fallen behind. So the focus of this part of the Millennium Development Goal 3 is not to undermine the importance of addressing male underachievement, but is definitely to look at how we can improve the quality of life of women and girls. So and that is where we will focus. What is it that prevents, in a developing country context, what is about gender issues? What is it that promotes not just angry reactions sometimes, but that results in a lack of understanding, you know? We read about all kinds of books, but what we have to understand is that the gender issues, which basically relate not to male and female, but relate to the roles that men and women are given or are ascribed to in a particular society, are very deep-rooted, and this is not only in developing countries. This is an issue as much in developed countries as it is among the poor. And gender issues are embedded in the social fabric of societies and have come from generations and hundreds of years. They're not easy to deal with or to remove. But gender disparities have a debilitating effect on overall growth. If 50% of your population is excluded from access to education, health, to income generating activities, to professional growth, then 50% of your capacity of your population is lost. And unless 50% is addressed, you cannot have inclusive growth. There is also a lot of lack of clarity at all levels of decision making as to what should we do about these gender issues. Should we make it gender exclusive? Shall we have programs and ICTs only for women and girls, or shall we have them as part of a larger problem or a larger program? When we say we want to have a gender exclusive program exclusively for women and girls, we're treating them as a special group, but in a real society they live as part of a larger group. When we look at them in terms of inclusive, sometimes the voices of gender, the voices of women and children are lost. So it's a very, very difficult issue, and there's a lack of clarity at all levels about how we should address it. More important than anything else is the fact that even today we do not have disaggregated data for most of Asia Pacific region. It means that we have to create databases to actually establish and verify what is the level of and what is the kind of gender difference and what is the impact it is having upon a society. It's not just merely a question of seeing how many girls are in schools. It is also a question of seeing what is happening to them afterwards. So these are the issues, that some of the issues that affect the way in which we look at gender. When we look at the poor women, who are actually the victims of the greatest amount of gender discrimination, we find in terms of their access to ICTs, the barriers for women are the same as they are for any other economic opportunity. Illiteracy. If you look at figures worldwide, you will find that more women are illiterate than men. Lack of awareness, lack of where to get the information. Poverty of income. Lack of economic security. Time famine. A woman just doesn't have the time to devote to learning because she has other social responsibilities of the home and the hearth. Low confidence as a result of not being exposed. Lack of mobility as a result of socio-cultural constraints. She, for reasons of security, for reasons of safety, for reasons of socio-economic constraints, cannot move outside her village, cannot move outside her home, and therefore we worry about her physical safety. All these are barriers. These barriers are no different in accessing education as they are to accessing ICTs. But these barriers have to be addressed if we are going to address gender roles. There's lack of relevance of content, cost, location. There are issues of benefits of broad development projects which have not reached women despite the intention. So going from just the barriers, there are also issues of how we design programs that target women in particular and a larger society to make it more inclusive. So these are issues in terms of gender and ICTs. I'm going to bring to you only two instances, one an award-winning global one and the other one which looks at a different form of empowerment. Many of you may have heard about the award-winning Grameen Bank, which won the Nobel Award for Peace. The Grameen Village Phone, which actually put the mobile phone in the hands of the women. Having done so, it provided an income-generating activity, which in turn led to security, which in turn led to empowerment. And while 10 years into this effort, it remains to be seen as to how, with the advent of technology, this has changed. It is still a pioneering effort, and therefore I invite you to look up the Grameen Village Phone project to see how it has worked. The Grameen Phone has been emulated and copied in other countries. It started in Bangladesh, but it has moved on to Africa. And the importance of looking at the Grameen Village Phone is to see whether this kind of a model is replicable and can be used in contexts other than a South Asian one. I invite you to look at the Grameen Phone, Village Phone example by going to their website. On another front, if it is to be income generating activities and if there are barriers that women face, and in a country like Malaysia, which in terms of all MDGs still is very, very high, what is it that women face. So when I argued that gender is an issue not just among the poor societies, but also among the better half, I have chosen as my example the Salaam Wanita case study from Malaysia. The Salaam Wanita basically talks about a site that is known as e-homemakers. Women who are at home, who have opted to stay at home, still need, sometimes single parents, still need income generating activities. And through the use of technology, the e-homemakers has enabled women not only to engage in income generating activities, but also to be able to interact among themselves and to empower themselves. A woman staying at home to look after children is an important contribution to society. But when she does this, while faced with economic barriers, an opportunity like e-homemakers, also an award-winning initiative, which enables, through the use of ICTs, income generation, while not losing sight of the primary responsibilities, is one that is worth looking at. A third example that I'm bringing you is really not about empowering women through ICTs, but of looking at another aspect of gender inequality, and that is of low participation rates of women in professional life. The Center for Women's Research in Sri Lanka is a network site that brings women together to debate common issues and to be able to bring about a greater empowerment. And this is again an example that comes out of a developing country which one has to explore. I invite you to look at some of these sites to see how they're going about and to see whether these sort of experiences can be replicated in your own jurisdictions or your own countries.